Hello and welcome. My name is Tim Poe. I'm Director of Telehealth with the UNC Cancer Network. It's May 9th, 2018, and this is our RN and Allied Health Lecture with the UNC Cancer Network. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Just a few preliminaries and then we'll meet our speaker and get started with our lecture. If you're having any technical difficulties at all, if my voice isn't clear, if the video or the slides aren't coming across, please call us 919-445-1000. We have technicians standing by who can help you with pretty much anything you'd need assistance with. So do let us know. Don't go on with difficulties that we could solve right at the beginning. Additionally, you can find us on the web, unccn.org. You'll find a schedule of events. You'll find a library of over 200 different oncology-related lectures, links to Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and we're also on Instagram and some other social media platforms as well. So let me talk about Poll Everywhere for just a moment. There are two different ways to use this. We're going to start out with a word cloud just to get everyone connected to Poll Everywhere at the beginning, and then at the end of the lecture you'll be able to submit your questions for our speaker. So if you have a web browser, whether that's on a phone or on a laptop, you can just go to pollev.com, pollev.com/UNCCN. That's all you need to do. You'll see the question or whatever is on the screen here will be there as well, so you can fill out a word cloud, ask a question, etc. You can also use any phone that has texting capabilities, and you'll just text to the number 22333. You only need to do this one time, and you'll do the letters UNCCN. So to the number 22333, you'll put in your message as UNCCN. You'll get a little reply back. It will say join, and then you can go ahead and address the different polls. Now the first one, it says, what is the one word that comes to mind when you think of medical marijuana? So this is a way for you to test, make sure that you've joined Poll Everywhere properly. So you can go ahead and do that now, and then we'll take a look at that in just a moment. All right, so again, what is the one word, and there may be several, but what's the first word that comes to mind when you think of medical marijuana? Go ahead and submit that either via the texting or via the website for Poll Everywhere, and we'll look at that in a moment. And let me adjust our screen just a little bit. There we go. So welcome, Dr. Benner. It's great to have you here today.
Thank you for having me.
So let me see. We've got a little bit of information about you here. Lead physician for Aspire Health in North Carolina and Virginia, and completed your medical school and internal medicine residency here at the University of Nebraska Medical Center. And after 12 years as an internal medicine hospitalist and assistant professor at UNC Chapel Hill School of Medicine, completed your fellowship in hospice and palliative care at the UNC Chapel Hill School of Medicine. Board certified internal medicine and board eligible in hospice and palliative care.
That's me.
What did I leave out?
That's it.
Okay. So you'll be speaking on the topic of medical marijuana today.
Yes.
What generated your interest in this topic?
So during my fellowship, I was at UNC about a year and a half ago. Mm-hmm. We were asked to give two different talks to the CCSP, which is the Comprehensive Cancer Support Program. And the people who attend that conference are oncologists, they are palliative medicine clinicians, and they are psychiatrists. And I thought, what meets that intersection? And I thought medical marijuana meets that in terms of symptom management, in terms of cancer patients, and in terms of the concerns over substance abuse and addiction issues. And that led to my growing interest in the field. And I will admit that when I first started researching medical marijuana, I came to it, I think, with some biases and concerns about yet another crutch. But as I did more research, I became fascinated with both the history, the politics thereof, and the opportunities and the possibilities of medical marijuana for our patient population.
Great, and this is an extremely topical issue, so we're, without further ado, we'll go ahead and let's look at our poll and see what we came up with, and of course the more people submitted the word, the larger it appears in our word cloud. Is that what you would have expected?
Yeah, I think that's how a lot of people feel about it. I think people feel that they know that it can help with pain and nausea and provide relief, and I think people are worried about the illegal issue, the issues regarding the laws, and is it actually good for patients or will it cause more problems? So I think that that's a pretty good representation of how people perceive medical marijuana, and I hope that at the end of it, maybe the word cloud might look a little more excited about medical marijuana. So
all right.
we shall see.
You have a fascinating talk ahead. Medical marijuana. It's high time to talk with Dr. Benner. Let me get you the both the keyboard, and you can just use those buttons on the corner there and the mouse.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. So I think it is a time to talk about medical marijuana, because I think the reality is that our patients are using medical marijuana. They are, whether you're asking them or not. And I think it's up to us to know everything our patients are using to help themselves and to understand if they're changing, what might be the root cause of it, because marijuana is not without side effects, and it's important to be aware of how your patients are doing and why. So, an overview of the talk. So I'm going to talk about the rich, fascinating history of medical marijuana, which is much more extensive than I had known. I'm going to talk about the pharmacology, physiology of medical marijuana, the current barriers to cannabis research to understand why we are not further along in our understanding. I'll address current research on medical marijuana, some of the safety concerns and side effects, and then the current political status. So, moving right into the history, to the history of medical marijuana. So, the herbal form is the most commonly used form in the United States, what we're all kind of familiar with, and this consists of the dried flowers and leaves and some of the stems of the female cannabis plant. And this is where the psychoactive substances are found, and this is different from hemp. So hemp and cannabis both come from the Cannabis sativa plant, but they are derived very differently, cultivated differently. I was talking to Tim before the talk, kind of like a red delicious apple and a crab apple, very different apples used for very different purposes. You would never eat a crab apple, or I hope you wouldn't. Marijuana actually is not the real term, it's cannabis, but marijuana is a slang term for the cannabis plant initially used by narcotics enforcement to scare potential users. Its history is rich, so this is actually a excavation done in present-day Afghanistan that uncovered a 120,000-year-old Paleolithic settlement, and several bodies in this urn where the arrow is pointing to, that actually was filled with cannabis seeds and ashes. The kind of prototypical plant is seen on Japanese Neolithic cave drawings about 10,000 years old, on ancient Greek pottery and in carvings, stone carvings in Roman and ancient Greek times. Egyptian pharaohs and priests, this is another stone carvings. I think this is probably my favorite historical representation. This is a excavation of a 2,500-year-old mummified Siberian princess who was buried with cannabis and found to have metastatic breast cancer, and it's alleged she may have used cannabis in a palliative sense. So, the history of medical marijuana is quite the roller coaster. So as I spoke about hemp briefly, so hemp cloth is still used today, but as early as the 1800s, hemp was cultivated and used in the U.S. colonies for supplies like rope and cloth, as they are today. However, in the late 19th century, so the late 1800s, cannabis became a popular ingredient in many medicinal products and was sold openly in public pharmacies. In the 1850s, the U.S. pharmacopoeia, the U.S. physician's pharmacopoeia, kind of like the Hippocrates of the 1850s, listed cannabis as highly recommended for a wide range of ailments that listed here: cannabis, seizures, neuropathy, and this wasn't removed until about 100 years later due to political ramifications, not because it wasn't proven to be beneficial. And Sir William Osler, who is known to be the father of modern medicine, stated there was no greater medicine for migraine headaches. And these are some pictures of extract bottles from that era demonstrating cannabis as the primary ingredient in a lot of these medicines. So the history continues. The 1920s and 1930s brought with it prohibition of alcohol. And at this time, there was many commercially available cannabis-based medications from some of the major medical suppliers: Eli Lilly, Park Davis, companies, and Merck that are still major suppliers today. However, studies began to link marijuana and its trade to an increase in violence and crimes. And by 1931, 29 states had already outlawed marijuana because of its link to violence and crimes. In the 1940s, the use of cannabis for any reason, including medicinal, was criminalized in the United States. And this was against the advice of the American Medical Association because physicians had begun to see the benefits for their patients. The 1960s and 70s brought about more lax politics and embrace of marijuana, and new research commissioned by JFK and President Johnson actually unlinked marijuana to crime, and this was an era of increased drug use. However, in the 1970s came the big change that really altered medical marijuana's course in our history. Marijuana became listed as a Schedule I drug, and some of you may be aware of what Schedule I means. What that means is that there are no currently accepted medicinal uses for this product and has a high potential for abuse. Just to give you some context, cocaine is actually listed as a Schedule II drug because there are some application in eye drops for glaucoma. In 1971, on the Controlled Substances Act, it criminalized all recreational and medicinal use of cannabis. So this, and it remains as listed as a Schedule I drug today, now, 40, 50 years later. At the same time of its prohibition, however, in 1975, the Journal of the NCI, the National Cancer Institute, found in a mouse model demonstration of lung cancer cells growth by compounds found in cannabinoids and cannabis, THC and CBN, found that it inhibited lung cancer cell growth. And that was in a mouse model, and a plate study in 1976 published in Cancer Research found inhibition of DNA synthesis of lung cancer cells using the same compounds. The political issues continued in the 1980s. President Bush, the DEA, which is the Drug Enforcement Agency, and the National Institute on Drug Abuse, the NIDA, start the war on drugs in the 1980s. And the war on drugs was this nationwide movement that emerged of parent groups lobbying for stricter regulations of marijuana use by teenagers, and in a hope to kind of rein in the use by young people, having no commentary on kind of the possible medicinal uses. And medicinal use continued. This is a great survey done by ASCO, which is the American Society of Clinical Oncology, done in 1990. This was a random sample survey of ASCO members, so this is all oncologists. And then what they were studying was the attitudes and experiences of U.S. oncologists concerning the use of marijuana for CINV, which stands for chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting. So they had over 1,000 oncologists respond, about 43%, and not all oncologists answered every question. So the overall percentages that are listed below is which of the people that responded, how many people felt that way. So 70% felt that, or reported at least one of their patients was using medical marijuana and that they talked to their patient about it. 44% of oncologists responding said they had recommended marijuana to at least one of their patients. And this is in the era of it being illegal and a Schedule I medication. 63% of doctors responding said that they agreed with the statement affirming the use of the efficacy, meaning that it was beneficial for the treatment of nausea and vomiting, and only 8% of the physicians disagreed with that. 73% felt that marijuana was both safe and effective, and 53% favored making medical marijuana available by prescription. And this is in the 1990s, the height of the restriction. In NIH as well, the National Institute of Health in 1997 convened a group of ad hoc experts which concluded that scientific evidence was insufficient to assess marijuana's therapeutic potential and advised the traditional scientific process be allowed to evaluate the drug used for certain disorders. And this has been the problem for medical marijuana research, is that blockade that allows medical marijuana research to go forward has never been lifted. And so as a result, many of today's views on medical cannabis, which I admit I feel vulnerable to in my own kind of thinking about it before I did my research, was based on like kind of these political and social agendas rather than medical evidence, which it needs to be addressed by. So you can see that in the 1970s there began to be some research into medical marijuana. It dropped off in the 80s with the war on drugs, and only slowly has begun to creep back. Talking about the pharmacology of medical marijuana. So the main component that we all probably know about is THC. This is delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol. So this is the primary psychoactive ingredient in cannabis, but it also has analgesic, meaning pain relief, anxiolytic, anti-anxiety, and anti-inflammatory properties. So the cannabis plant contains the compound THCA, which is non-psychoactive. You have to heat the cannabis to cause the hydroxylation of the THC into the psychoactive form, which is why you can't just eat marijuana. It has to be heated. That's why people cook it into brownies, like on my first slide, or have to smoke it. I always think about how they kind of figured that out. I imagine a big campfire about, many years ago of the cannabis plant, and people started getting high, and that's how they figured out that there was something about that plant. Marijuana's psychoactive strength is correlated to the percent of THC it contains, and that has been rising over the past decades. The THC content in marijuana has been increasing since the 1970s due to selective breeding of the plant, right? So this is what we do, right? We breed plants to be healthier and stronger, and in this case, we're breeding THC to be more potent. The average THC percent today in today's plants is about 20%, and back in the 1970s was only 1 to 2%. Other parts of the cannabis that are important to know about is CBD. Some of you may have heard of this. Its mechanism of action is not entirely understood, but it has reported to have analgesic, so pain relief. It's beneficial for seizures, anxiety, and nausea, and it lacks the psychoactive effects of THC and kind of modulates and reduces the effect of THC. It's the main cannabinoid in the low THC strains that I'm going to refer to in just a minute. And so what modern breeders are developing high CBD, low THC content or strains for medicinal use without the psychoactive component. And CBD is known to be potent for anti-seizure activity. Actually in North Carolina, you are able to do research on high CBD, low THC as a treatment for intractable seizures. And here are some possible anti-epileptic mechanisms. So CBD blocks the NMDA receptor, which is a similar mechanism to an old seizure drug called felbamate. It enhances the GABA receptor, similar to medications still used today, Depakote, phenobarbital, and Tegretol. And it stabilizes ion channels, similar to some of the most modern medications we have for seizures, so Keppra, Lamictal, and Trileptal, as well as Dilantin. So we know there's a reason it works. So this is a little girl who really started the interest in medical marijuana and seizures for children. So this is a little girl named Charlotte Fiji, and she's quite famous in the medical marijuana world. She has a syndrome called Dravet syndrome, which is a febrile and afebrile seizure syndrome in young children, and they have status epilepticus. And this little girl and her family had tried, you can see, quite a few medications, and it had failed to suppress her seizures. And at age of 5, she had significant cognitive and motor delays, requiring a feeding tube and needing full assistance with all of her activities of daily living. And was having about 50 generalized tonic-clonic seizures a day. You can imagine with all of those tonic-clonic seizures, she had no time to recover her brain function. So her family had heard about the possible use of cannabinoids. Her family contacted some growers in Colorado who were growing a strain of high CBD, low THC marijuana. Was actually initially called Fool's Gold. Because the breeders had discovered this strain and were disappointed that it was very high in CBD and low THC. But this was a perfect strain to try on Charlotte here. And so they had Charlotte come out through this organization called Realm of Caring, and she began to use these, then called Fool's Gold, now called Charlotte's Web, low doses of the extract from the plant. And they found by month 3, she had a 90% reduction in her seizures and was removing off all of her anti-epileptic medications. And you can see the little girl in the picture there. That's a very different looking little girl, right? So now feeding herself, and her autistic behaviors have improved. She's walking and talking. And families across the country are struggling to obtain medical marijuana for their children with intractable seizures, given the legal repercussions of state-by-state regulations. So cute little girl, right? Other parts of the cannabinoids, I'm not going to go through all these, but you can read them yourself. But it's important to know that there are many, many compounds in cannabis, and due to the restrictions on research, we don't know a lot about everything. But what we do know is about something called the Entourage Effect. So there was a physician named Dr. Ethan Russo in 2011 who discovered that marijuana has 483 compounds within it, and they work together to provide its benefit. And that's important to understand. And this is why it's helpful to explain why Marinol. So Marinol is 100% synthetic THC. So what the drug companies did is they figured out the chemical compound of THC, and they replicated it and make it as a synthetic isolate. But the reason it's ineffective, and many of the patients probably say, I tried it, it didn't really work, is because it lacks the other 482 compounds in the cannabis. Then they all work together synergistically to give the benefit for appetite stimulation. And this is why in a 2011 study of almost 1,000 patients, less than 2% of patients preferred some synthetic for appetite stimulation versus the THC-containing pharmaceuticals of the real cannabis plant. So the entourage effect is really important, understanding why you can't just isolate it and make it synthetically. Although drug companies wish that wasn't true. And this is, I think, an interesting diagram from a company called Leafly, which is one of the kind of big medical marijuana information sites, and it looks at which of the some of the compounds in cannabis are beneficial for different disorders. So for GI stuff, CBD and THC. For Parkinson's, THC and THC alpha, so subtypes. So it kind of gives you an idea, and the breeders, the people who are growing medical marijuana, are aware of which compounds within medical marijuana are beneficial and actually can advise and grow for patients what they need. A little about the physiology. So question for you all, what do these two have in common? Any ideas? So the answer is the endocannabinoid system. So this was a term coined in the 1990s when there was a discovery of the membrane receptors in our own body for THC, the psychoactive principal component in cannabis, and their own endogenous ligands. So what highly conserved means is that this endocannabinoid system is found in every species, from the fly, the lower invertebrates, all the way to higher mammals to humans. These are genes that are vital to the normal function of the human. This endocannabinoid system is so vital to the existence of every creature from flies to us, that if anything happened to the endocannabinoid system, that species, including us, would go extinct. I think that's really important to know, because it must be important if it's highly conserved in that way. So what is the endocannabinoid system? It's 3 parts. So it's the endocannabinoids. So these are our body's own pieces of the endocannabinoid system. They're the breakdown products of arachidonic acid. Some of you may remember from biochemistry. These are the molecules that bind to our own body's cannabinoid receptors. Does this work? Mm-hmm. So you can see here, this is the precursor, and then the enzymes, part 2, is the things that break them down to the AEA and the 2-AG. And then the third part of it are these cannabinoid receptors. So there's the 3 parts of the receptors are of the endocannabinoid system. And so you can see that the endogenous cannabinoids as well as plant-derived cannabinoids both hit this cannabinoid receptor and cause the same downstream effect of neurotransmitter release. And the cannabinoid receptors, there are 2 types, and I'll get into that in a second, but they are found diffusely throughout our body. You can see the CB1 are highly aggregated in our brain and spinal cord, and so our central nervous system, whereas the CB2 receptors are a little bit more diffusely spread out. So the cannabinoid, the CB1 receptor types, primarily found in the brain, in the basal ganglia, and in the limbic system. Interestingly and importantly, the CB1 receptors are not found in the medulla oblongata. This is why marijuana does not suppress breathing. Because they hit THC, cannabinoids hit the CB1 receptors and cannot suppress breathing. Activation of the CB1 receptors are responsible for the psychoactive effects of the cannabinoids, the THC. And CBD, that other compound I talked about, is what we call an inverse agonist to CB1 receptors, meaning it hits the CB1 receptor and causes the opposite effect of THC, so it has the anti-psychoactive effect. And you can see distribution of the CB1 receptors throughout our brain. And this is why cannabinoids are so effective for things like pain and nausea and balance and tremors and kind of centrally acting issues. The CB2 receptors are primarily found in our immune system. They're inducible in other tissues and organs, including the central nervous system, and they appear to be responsible for kind of the anti-inflammatory immunosuppressive effects of cannabis. I'll talk about it in just a second. So the barriers to cannabis research, and this is why we don't know more, and I think this is a great picture because there's the guy trying to deliver the medical marijuana research, and there's that dog in the way called the DEA standing between drugs getting studied and available through the FDA. And this is why. So clinical research currently can get permission from the DEA to grow or create compounds that are known to be addictive medications like LSD and MDMA, which is ecstasy, or psilocybin, which are magic mushrooms, but not for cannabis, interestingly. In order to do cannabis research, you have to get a DEA license, you have to get your study approved by the FDA, and this is what's really important, is you have to be able to obtain research-grade marijuana through the NIDA, the National Institute on Drug Abuse. And the University of Mississippi is the only place in the United States able to grow medical marijuana for medical marijuana research, versus Canada, where they have 30 licensed providers. And I want to talk about why the NIDA is a problem in terms of approving studies. The purpose of the NIDA, so this is a study from the National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. So the NIDA, the mission, and it's in orange here, to advance science on the causes and consequences of drug use and addiction and apply that to knowledge to improve individual and public health. They are anti-drug use. Okay, and as a result of its emphasis down here, less than 1/5 of cannabis research funded by the NIDA, so less than 20% back in 2015, concerned the therapeutic properties of cannabis. Their studies are about preventing drug use, not promoting medical marijuana research. And that's some would say that that's not an appropriate use of restriction. So in August 2016, President Obama during that time and a number of politicians tried to get the DEA to reschedule marijuana and open the door to research, but they elected not to do that. So we are still Schedule I medication, the class of Schedule I medication at this time. And you can see as a result, I scoured the literature looking at, this is PubMed, looking at drug as treatment. So not drugs of abuse, whatever, so just as treatment. And you can see in the 37 years of these studies, 1990 to 2017, there were 67 studies done on medical marijuana versus over almost 5,000 on morphine, 1,200 on Zofran, on interferon for MS, 800, Seroquel, 503, Abilify, 381. So you can see the medical, so for a drug that's been around for as long as it has, we have the paucity of research is really concerning. And you can see here, this is from a site called ProCon, which tends to be a very non-biased, just looking at kind of the overall objective studies on different controversial issues. And this, what they found is this is the number of studies, peer-reviewed studies on medical marijuana listed by condition. So there's been how many on ALS? 1. And they found it was beneficial. How many on bipolar? 2. Right? So how many on Huntington's disease? 1. How many on MS? 11 or 14 total, right? And so it's impossible to believe that you would actually be able to find out if medical marijuana has been effective if you've got one peer-reviewed study in 37 years, right? One on rheumatoid arthritis. And this demonstrates the real obstacles to medical marijuana studies and to determine what is actually beneficial, because people just don't know. Other issues, potency issues. The highest available THC for research is 12.4%, and as I just said, in Colorado, it's about 18.4% as the average people are using. And the only 2 NIH-funded trials in 2014 used 3.5 and 7.0% THC. So they're using strains that are much less potent. So how do you know if you're not using the right dosage, right? Current research on medical cannabis. So I like art. So this is a guy named William Altermolen. He was an artist in the 1960s, and he developed Alzheimer's dementia. And these are his self-portraits through the years, suffering from Alzheimer's dementia. And cannabis has been shown to be beneficial in Alzheimer's disease. So this is the scientific background. One study demonstrated that a CB2 agonist, so something that was actually perpetuating CB2, induced removal of the amyloid plaques. That's what Alzheimer's is Alzheimer plaque formation in the brain. And this effect was reversed by antagonizing that. So they actually found that there was less plaque formation when they gave cannabis products when they had a CB2 agonist. Here's a clinical study, tiny, 11 patients with Alzheimer's dementia over 4 weeks given cannabis oil, and they found significant reductions in their disease severity score. And they found that the patients had less delusions, aggression, sleep disturbance, irritability, apathy, and importantly, caregiver distress. Importantly, this is another important study in Parkinson's disease because patients with Parkinson's have no good treatments. They looked at 22 patients in a motor disorder clinic at a tertiary care hospital, and they found that after 30 minutes after inhaled use, patients had significant improvements in all the cardinal symptoms of Parkinson's, so the bradykinesia, the tremor, the rigidity, and pain in their disease rating score, and importantly, no adverse effects. And I think this is a pretty cool video that shows a Parkinson's patient and his first use of medical marijuana.
Hi Larry, how are you? Come in. Let's see. How you feeling? It's been a bit of a rough week, really. And the best way to take it is put it under your tongue and rub it in your cheek. Don't do too much. You're going to be asleep all afternoon. You know what you should do? No, don't try to communicate. Just relax. See what happens.
We know from animal experiments that the endogenous cannabinoid system is very important in regulating motor activity, the very type of activity that is impaired in Parkinson's disease. From animal experiments, we also know that boosting certain branches of the endocannabinoid system is helpful in relieving symptoms of Parkinson's. Finally, from anecdotal information, we know that certain patients who smoke marijuana experience relief of their symptoms.
I think you're calmed down.
So quickly.
Isn't that amazing?
He used just a single drop, and his hands afterwards were rock steady, and the dyskinesia left.
Who else is coming back?
It works most of the time.
In fact, it's... Did you guys eat lunch?
Are you hungry now?
But I am. Actually,
Personally, could really use marijuana. It makes me pretty angry that I can't get in my home state.
The number one frustration that I have is knowing that there is this untapped potential that comes from what marijuana is teaching us to generate new medicines, and being stuck because of financial issues or political issues. That is extremely frustrating.
We now know that medical marijuana controls dyskinesia, and yet it's not available to us.
And Dr. Benner, I just wanted to mention for our audience, when we take a video and then show it as a video through the streaming, you'll probably see it looks a little stilted or halting. If any of our audience members would like to see that on YouTube, you can go to unccn.org/video1, and we've got a shortcut at that where you can go ahead and see that video directly off of YouTube. And so we just wanted to make sure if you want to see that in full motion, that's an opportunity, and we'll have a link like that. It's actually the same link for the video coming up, only it will be unccn.org/video2.
Thanks for providing that. I appreciate
Of
it.
course.
All right, moving on. So MS, another disease in which medical marijuana has been shown to be beneficial, and this is an artist drawing representation of she actually herself as MS, and you can see her representation of her brain and spinal cord attacking herself. It's an autoimmune disorders. Activated cells lead to demyelination of nerve fibers, leading to muscle spasms, tremor, weakness, and paralysis. And the cannabinoids protect against these cells dying in the brain, these myelin sheaths dying in the brain by action of the CB1 and CB2 receptors. And then in 1994, so 30 years ago, 112 MS patients self-medicating with cannabis in the United States and in the UK demonstrated improvement in symptoms of their cardinal symptoms, spasticity, pain, tremor, and depression in over 90% of patients, highly efficacious. Interestingly, in ischemic stroke, so this is a mouse model, they looked at MCA stroke, so middle cerebral artery stroke in mice, and these mice were either given a CB agonist or antagonist, and they measured neuroblasts, which are the new neurons coming towards the brain that has been attacked through the ischemic site, and they found the CB antagonist. So if you blocked the CB2 receptor, there were less new neurons moving towards the stroke site. Lower numbers of new neurons were formed, and patients had worse sensory motor function. But when you give a CB2 agonist, you increase migration of neuroblasts, meaning patients actually had, in mice, not patients, in mice, they actually were developing more neurons, more new neurons, and possibly more improvement in recovery of a function. It's also beneficial in colitis. There's a lot of receptors in the GI tract, and they found that CB1 receptors are found in the ileum and the colon, and the number of CB1 expressing cells is increased after inflammation. So when they blocked the CB1 receptor or had CB1 deficient mice, they had increased sensitivity to inflammatory insults or worse colitis. So enhancing CB1 actually may protect against colitis. And this is found to be important in Crohn's disease. So 30 young men with Crohn's disease evaluated for their disease activity, and given cannabis, they had improvement in their disease activity, they had less medication use and less need for surgery. Going back to some of the cancer research, the mouse studies have shown that cannabis, remember back in the 1970s, shown that cannabis may inhibit tumor growth. And this has actually been shown in a number of different cancer models. So THC in models of hepatocellular carcinoma, HCC had anti-tumor effects, and also found it had benefit in lung cancer, non-small cell lung cancer, and breast cancer. It's been shown as some benefit in ALL, acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Use of CBD in breast cancer cells, both estrogen positive and estrogen negative, which are the tougher to treat, demonstrated increased cancer cell death and had little effect on normal breast cells. In GBMs, the human glioma, what John McCain is currently dying from, CBD given with chemotherapy, the temozolomide that is the standard therapy for gliomas right now for GBMs, increased the efficacy of the chemotherapy without harming their normal cells. Okay, so there's promising stuff out there, we just don't know enough. We talked briefly about cancer or cannabinoids for chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting, and they found that it actually works the same way as Zofran, and is actually more effective than Zofran, and it blocks that 5-HT3 receptor. And cancer in terms of pain relief, or cannabis in terms of pain relief. So 2 small trials of oral THC had demonstrated better relief of cancer pain and cancer chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting with better appetite. And this is important. So what they did is they sprayed cannabis under the tongue of patients. And patients whose pain was not relieved with opiates alone, strong opiates, methadone, morphine, Dilaudid, whatever, whose pain was still not controlled, it had a kind of a synergistic effect. And they were able to control their pain. In addition, unlike opiates, where there's increasing tolerance, you need higher and higher doses, medical marijuana doesn't create tolerance, so you don't need higher and higher doses. Rheumatoid arthritis, this is Renoir, the artist. You can see he's got rheumatoid arthritis. You can see this in the kind of the swan neck deformities of his hands. So animal trials have shown that CBD effectively blocks the progression of rheumatoid arthritis, and it protects the joints. And the patients receiving cannabis-based medicine had improved pain and joint movement, pain while at rest, and quality of sleep. Osteoarthritis, so there are increasing numbers of older patients using opiates for osteoarthritic pain. Synthetic cannabinoids offer strong anti-inflammatory immunosuppressive properties and may help patients with osteoarthritis. And cannabis is found to be effective for reducing the kind of cartilaginous breakdown seen in osteoarthritis. And here's another video talking about some benefits of medical marijuana.
Hi, everybody.
For this group of elderly Americans, using marijuana was definitely not on their bucket list.
I have never smoked in my life. I'm 100.
What's in each dose?
Dr. Zachary Pallas of the Hebrew Home in New York thinks maybe it's time for a change.
This is uncharted territory.
You ready to go have some lunch?
98-year-old Ruth Braun is in constant and extreme pain from neuropathy. She started using medical marijuana 3 months ago.
Well, I do know that since I'm using it and taking it, that I have less pain, that I'm more relaxed.
Less pain, less stress, and a reduction in her daily dosage of a powerful opioid. Do you see a difference?
I see a big difference. She has several doses of morphine, but we were able to back it off one so far.
Really?
Throughout the day.
Older adults that are in their 80s and 90s grew up where marijuana was really viewed as an illicit drug.
Right.
The evil weed.
Marijuana, the burning weed with its roots in hell.
And yet we find that they're very open to anything that's going to reduce pain.
We always have to be careful.
Dr. Pallas is impressed with the results he's seen so far in a handful of patients, but
we need to rethink our current policies in terms of allowing medical research on medical cannabis.
And as for the stigma, the evil weed?
I saw no reason why it wouldn't work, because God gave us the herbs of the earth, and the marijuana is one of it.
Harry Smith, NBC News, New York.
There was actually a movie, that clip was from a movie called Reefer Madness, which was created in the 1930s to warn against the evil dangers of weed. It's a real movie. So I thought this was a cute cartoon. More senior citizens are using pot. Really feeling my joints today. Me too. And the research done on medical marijuana and pain is real. I think this was a great picture of them both smoking his doobage. So in animal models, cannabis has been shown to relieve pain in every experimental pain model, and that's in every way that pain is produced from the supraspinal, so in the brain, the spinal and peripheral regions, and involving both the ascending and descending pain pathways. This is just some ways it's thought to work. It may act on inflammation, that it works in neuropathic pain, and that's why it's effective for that sweet lady talking about her neuropathic pain. And the CB1 receptors are found in high concentrations in the brain, like I showed you, in a similar distribution to the opiate receptors, but not in the medulla oblongata. This is why you can't overdose. And they found that cannabis is the most common reason, or chronic pain is the most reason that people are using cannabis in California. There's about 1.92 million users. The patients are finding that's really efficacious, and in a time of the opiate epidemic and trying to cut back on opiates, patients are looking for alternatives because it isn't their pain's going away, we're just removing their treatment options. States in the United States with medical cannabis laws have less opiate overdose mortality rates than those with them. And when patients are using medical marijuana as an adjunct to opiates, especially in palliative care, they're using lower doses of opiates and decreasing their overdose risk. Tim had asked me earlier about other countries. So Israel is one of the leaders in medical marijuana research, kind of in all areas of therapeutic use. And you can see here there's a study. I don't expect to be able to see this, but what you can see on the left are all these different symptoms patients are having: nausea, vomiting, fatigue, weight loss. And between the first and second interview, patients had decreased severity scores of all of those different things that ailed them after using cannabis. This was a very cool study. This was a study done at University of Georgia looking at medical marijuana use and patterns of prescribing in 17 different states. And what they found is when medical marijuana is legal, doctors are prescribing medicines less for things that medical marijuana could be used for. So again, it's hard to use this. What they found, see this overall, but what they found is that for patients where medical marijuana is legal, the numbers of depression meds are going down. The numbers of psychosis meds are going down. The number of anti-epileptic medication prescriptions are going down. The number of pain prescriptions are going down. The number of medications for sleep disorders are going down. And so in 2014, this was a poll conducted by Medscape and WebMD, found that 3/4 of U.S. physicians think cannabis provides real therapeutic benefits, and those working with cancer patients were the strongest supporters. 82% of oncologists felt it should be offered as a treatment option. And this is Donald Adams, who's the chief of Hem-Onc at UCSF in California, and he says a day doesn't go by where I don't see a cancer patient who has nausea, vomiting, loss of appetite, pain, depression, etc. And marijuana is the only anti-nausea medicine that increases appetite. It also helps patients sleep and elevate their mood. No easy feat when someone's facing a life-threatening illness. I could write 6 different prescriptions, all of which may interact with each other, or the chemotherapy that the patient has just been prescribed, or I could just recommend trying one medicine. American Cancer Society also recommending scientific research being moved forward. The American College of Physicians, again, urges review of medical marijuana status as a Schedule I controlled substance. In terms of safety concerns and side effects, so inhaled, rapidly absorbed, peak concentration within 10 minutes, rapid declines over the next 30 minutes, whereas bioedibles, like edibles and oils, like brownies and oils, takes a longer time to come on, about one hour, and it lasts about 6 hours and can be in your system for about 20 to 30 hours, but you have to eat more. The inhalation is rapidly absorbed versus the bioavailability. When you eat it, it's digested in your gut and you don't get as much, so you have to eat more. There's not a ton known on dosing, but in general, it's always a trial and error like it is with every medication. You don't know how many milligrams of metoprolol you're going to need to control your blood pressure. Dosing of cannabis is going to be patient dependent. Patients shouldn't drive for at least 3 to 4 hours after smoking until they figure out how it affects them. Side effects, can it be addictive? Sure, but this is actually a study looking at recreational use and not medical marijuana use. It can cause some short-term memory problems in young people using it for the lifetime. This is something I have seen repeatedly in my work as an internal medicine doctor. Young people coming in who use marijuana for anxiety, develop cannabis hyperemesis syndrome, where they come in with intractable nausea and vomiting, and it's a cyclic pattern, and it resolves when they stop smoking marijuana, although they think that if they smoke marijuana it'll get better because they think it helps with nausea. Cardinal symptoms, it's better after they take a hot shower. Some side effects: people who smoke marijuana have some respiratory issues, just like cigarette smokers, and smoke cannabis has been found to contain the mold aspergillosis. But I think it's important to also understand that Canada has dealt with this by offering irradiated cannabis to its cancer patients for this reason. So while the mold is there, there's a way to get rid of it and make it safe. There is some increased risk in lung cancer, just like with tobacco products. But important to understand is that cannabis does not have significant side effects. There's no constipation, no nausea, no vomiting, no pruritus, which is itching, no respiratory suppression. There's no withdrawal. There's no end organ damage. You can't hurt your kidneys or your liver. There's no lethal dose, and nobody's ever died from overdose on cannabis. Current status, medical marijuana is legal in the majority of states, but it's limited in what is actually available. As you can see, there's a wide variation. So in Pennsylvania, medical marijuana use is its applications are widespread, everything from epilepsy to sickle cell disease to autism to just the definition of terminally ill, versus in North Carolina, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Tennessee, it's only available for epilepsy and tractable seizures. In North Carolina, as I alluded to, Governor McCrory signed HB 1220, which allows universities, happening in Wake Forest now, to conduct clinical trials on CBD oil that's less than 0.3% THC and at least 10% CBD. That's the only thing legal in North Carolina at this point. However, things are changing. This has just happened a couple weeks ago. Former Republican Speaker of the House, John Boehner, actually has just joined the board of a cannabis company, and he is, for probably the wrong reasons of financial gain, he is now convinced that descheduling the drug is needed so we can do research, help our veterans, and reverse the opioid epidemic ravaging our community. So the tides of politics are changing. And Chuck Schumer he's the minority leader of the House, is introducing medical marijuana decriminalization legislation, including legislation to remove marijuana as off the controlled substances list. And this is interesting. This is from a friend of mine went to a medical marijuana dispensary in Colorado, and these are people coming to Colorado are asked to put a pin in where they come from. As you can see, there isn't a single spot in the United States that is not covered in parts of Europe and South America and anyways. So people are using medical marijuana, whether they tell you or not, they are using it. And it's a huge business. In 2015, $1 billion in sales of medical marijuana in Colorado, $1 billion. This is what it looks like when you go to a medical marijuana dispensary. It looks kind of like a truffle shop to me, kind of. And as I had mentioned earlier, breeders are growing strains of marijuana to a very exact science to kind of give patients what they need in terms of what kind of symptom relief they were looking for. It is a very refined science. This is no joke, and this is big money. So it's important, I think, when you think about people who are using medical marijuana, this is kind of what I think we all picture about people using marijuana. And I think it's time to change the dialogue and look who's actually using medical marijuana, which are patients like this. That's it. Happy to take questions.
Dr. Benner, thank you so much. This has been extremely informative. We do look forward to your questions. Let me remind you that you can use Poll Everywhere. There are the references, and that's on the slide deck that we've shared out as PDF on our site as well.
Sorry, it's a lot of references.
No, that's terrific. So remember, you can go ahead and go to Poll Everywhere. You can text the letters UNCCN to the number 22333. If you didn't do that already at the beginning, you can do that now. And that will go ahead and activate Poll Everywhere. And then if you did that at the beginning, or if you did that just now, you can go ahead and text in your questions. You can also do that at pollev.com/UNCCN. There you can just go ahead and start texting in your questions. So we'll look forward to those. So I had a few while we're waiting for our audience to share questions. So, this is not prohibitively expensive, minimal side effects. It's got to be, and 93%, a poll that I saw yesterday on the news was indicating 93% of the American population is for legalization of medical marijuana. So what's going to change this politically? What's going to move this forward, in your opinion?
I think it's, as so many things do, it requires a person in power caring. So it's going to have to be a politician, typically who has a family member affected. Probably, I think that'll be the first triggers. Gotcha. So, but as you can see, John Boehner, I think the politics of money, the money is is driving the train a little bit here too.
Gotcha. All right. Well, we've got some questions coming in. Is it covered by payers in North Carolina?
So currently medical marijuana is not legal in North Carolina. There's only studies. Medical marijuana I do not believe is covered by insurance anywhere at this point. So there are factors limiting the ability to access marijuana financially. So.
Okay. And sort of in line with the question I'd asked earlier, what can be done to help support the legalization?
Mm-hmm. So I would say talk to your representative. Let them know you care. There are bills and legislation all the time. You can look up North Carolina medical marijuana. There are bills being introduced all the time. So just be aware in the upcoming election cycle and let your legislators know you care and this is important to you.
Okay, very good. Somebody who said, I really enjoyed the discussion. Have you seen studies on autism?
So the studies on autism are very impressive. There's actually an entire Facebook group called Mothers for Medical Marijuana, MAMMA, and there are studies on autism being done in Israel right now that are very promising. And as I showed you, in some states, including Pennsylvania, it is approved for the use in autism. And I think it just was approved for autism, added to the list in another state. Might have been New Jersey yesterday, was approved for the treatment of autism. So as another disease that has no treatment, it has been shown to be highly effective, at least anecdotally, in terms of autism with kind of repetitive behaviors and issues.
I was going to say, with autism being really a collection of symptoms, are there particular symptoms that it addresses? So it's some of the repetitive behaviors.
Absolutely, absolutely, in terms of violence and, anyways.
It is my understanding that we could not, as healthcare professionals, suggest the use of CBD oil to our patients if they do not have epilepsy.
So I think, CBD oil is obtainable through hemp products locally. I think it is our responsibility to patients to let them know that they should do their research in looking for, so I've had patients all the time. When I was as a palliative care physician at UNC, people contacted me all the time to ask about medical marijuana, and it is my job to say, it's not legal here. However, there are real benefits being shown in studies and in other states, and it's up to you to, do your own research and find communities that might be using. But it is our job to tell you that there's literature supporting it. Yes.
Okay. And for Clip, we were talking before this began airing about CBD and the fact, for instance, in Chapel Hill, there are 3 or 4 shops where you can go and purchase CBD, but that's hemp-based CBD and not cannabis-based CBD.
So the potency is much different.
Gotcha. All right. Any use in intracranial hypertension?
I'm not aware of any, and I'd have to think about the mechanism that would be beneficial for, but not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Is there any research on medical marijuana and ADHD?
Again, that's not a big thrust of research that I'm aware of. There is some anecdotal information about that I've seen on the internet, but I've not seen that be a big thrust of ADHD research.
All right. Love all these questions coming in. Thank you so much for keep sending those. How involved is the AMA, NC Medical Association in the efforts to legalize medical use in North Carolina?
So I would say they are not very, and this is why calling them and asking your representatives to get involved would be important. I think that would be the important thing to do. But there are some people, there are some representatives who are increasingly interested in the use of medical marijuana. As a matter of fact, David Casseret is the head of the Duke Palliative Care Program, and he wrote the book Stoned, and he's become a major force for good in the medical marijuana movement.
All right. Has CBD been studied in myoclonic twitching?
I am not aware of that, but I imagine with the kind of central nervous system base that would be effective.
And do you know of any studies that that talk about cannabis for schizophrenia?
I do.
So what sites?
I do. There's actually a great, and I can send the slide to you, Tim, if you want. There's actually, so cannabis or THC has actually been known to make schizophrenia worse. However, there's great study done in Europe on schizophrenia showing that CBD is actually as effective for schizophrenia as an antipsychotic medicine, and I'd be happy to send those slides to you.
That would be great. I'll go ahead and we'll add that information to the site where you registered for this lecture, so we can go ahead and add that on. And
I'd be happy to.
If you have any follow-up questions, you can also contact us at unccn@unc.edu. All right, I can get CBD oil from my chiropractor, and it works well for inflammation and joint pain.
That's great.
And do you feel that the use of hemp is useful at all? So kind of back to that previous CBD question.
Sure, I do. I think the potency is just different. And I think if you're using it for mild pain, I think a mild drug like is found in hemp is going to be effective. I think for patients with significant things like chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting, Parkinson's, Huntington's, things like that have, very large symptom complexes, you're going to need more potency, and that hemp probably will not be efficacious for that, and that's why you need the higher potency items found in the actual cannabis.
Gotcha. So somebody who is taking the hemp-based CBD should not be necessarily thinking that that's going to give them the same pain relief or address other issues that a cannabis-based CBD would.
Correct.
All right. So and we have a couple of more minutes, so if you do have additional questions, please go ahead and share those. Oh, here we go. Do you know of any evidence that THC can stimulate hormone-dependent cancers such as breast, prostate? Culture seems to think that it does.
That it stimulates hormone, that it actually can cause. So I'm wondering if the question is, can it cause proliferation of those cells? So the only study that I'm aware of was the one I cited where they demonstrated that it actually caused decreased cancer growth in ER-negative cells. Estrogen-positive cells. So I don't know about proliferation and worsening of hormone-dependent, hormone-sensitive cancers. So that's not what I'm not aware of that, but I would love to be educated.
Okay. And you did mention some studies that indicated that there was a positive interaction between medical marijuana and certain chemotherapies.
Indeed, like temozolomide for glios, for GBMs.
No, just not to be as effective as CBD. Not sure I'm quite following.
You can rephrase that, and I'd be happy to answer that.
Yeah, if you want to, if you can give us a little more context on that, we can try to address that. So I'm curious, given for a clinician who has all this information that you just shared and is seeing patients that are that she or he feels can benefit from this and are living in a state, working in a state where this is not legal, I mean, how are clinicians dealing with this? And how are they interacting with their patients around this, given that they have this knowledge of something that can be highly effective, minimal side effects, and yet not available legally.
Well, exactly, and it's not that it's not available; it's just not available legally. And so I will tell you that there are many patients. I have, as I said during my fellowship, there are many patients who are using cannabis products, not hemp-based products. They're bringing them in from out of state, and I think it is our job, in the same way we always do a social history. Or when we're doing a medical history of what are you taking, and I always say, what are your prescribed medications, what are your over-the-counter medications, and what are you taking that's herbal? And it is our responsibility to ask them in an open, non-judgmental fashion. Increasing number, and I would say it this way, increasing numbers of patients are using medical marijuana and finding it effective for a number of symptoms. Have you ever used it, or are you currently using it? Right? And you become at patients with an open mind, and you come at them with a non-judgmental fashion, like we do with everything we ask of patients, they're going to be more open with us. And I think that's important.
Do you think that that's changing in terms of patients' willingness to share that information? Obviously, you want to know that information as a clinician, so you do see that people appear to be more willing to disclose.
Much more. I was in Asheville with my husband on a vacation, and we were staying at a bed and breakfast, and one day there was this group of people, and this gentleman who was a headmaster at a Christian boarding school found out I was a palliative care physician, was asking me about the use of cannabis for his Crohn's disease. He was in his 70s and had the kind of the later onset of Crohn's disease. And then the very next day, that person had left and a new person had come, and we're at the table, and she found out I was a palliative care doctor and started asking me about the use for rheumatoid arthritis. So people are using it. It's widespread, and people deserve good symptom control, so they're using it. They just may not be telling you they're using it. So.
Any other questions? We're going to have to wrap up in just a moment. I want to thank our audience for great questions, and I know we had a big turnout today. Our team has been telling me lots of sites connected, and that we had a large audience in Zoom as well. So thank you all so much for being here and being a part of the conversation. We do want to say thank you to the generous support from the North Carolina General Assembly for the University Cancer Research Fund. Thank you to UNC Lineberger Comprehensive Cancer Center. We want to thank Mary King, Veneranda Obore, and John Powell for all the work that they do to make each and every one of these lectures possible. And of course, thank you to you, our audience. Coming up, May 23rd, Medical and Surgical Oncology Lecture, Acute Myeloid Leukemia, finally making progress with Dr. Zeidner. And then on June 13th, our RN and Allied Health Lecture next month, Breast Imaging Technologies, Cancer Detection and Personalized Medicine with Dr. Kuzmiak. So we hope that you'll be able to join us for both of those. We love to hear from you. In our most recent newsletter, I mentioned, please tell us your stories. I would love to hear from you about something that you learned from one of our lectures and how it helped you in your practice. So if you have a story as a clinician that you can tell us about something you learned that maybe you actually applied to what you do, we would love to hear about that. Lots more information on our site, unccn.org. Sign up for upcoming lectures. Find out about lectures throughout the year. We have a great lineup up through the end of this year. Facebook, Twitter, all that good stuff. Until our next lecture, we hope you have a great afternoon, great week, and we'll see you soon. Thanks so much. Dr. Bender, thank you again.
My pleasure.